There's a new book that just came out. Are any of you familiar with Jonathan Cahn? He's written the book, The Harbinger in the past. Well, he's just written a new book, The Oracle. And I'll be totally honest, I didn't realize how blind I was by the gods of this world. That was a history lesson, and I'm only halfway through the book. That was a history lesson of God's work in humanity that I could not even have imagined. And I highly recommend the book. But just as I was reading this book, I was challenged with this thought. That we are living on a massive chessboard. And God is playing, and the devil's being humiliated. Yeah. In this chess match, God's even given Satan a handicap. Because he tells Satan what he's going to do. And then Satan tries his best to thwart the plans of God. And the whole time, God's laughing at him and saying, boy, watch this. I'm going to take that move that you just did, and I'm going to use it for my benefit. Watch. This will be funny. And that's what we would call history. His story. God playing in the chess match, making Satan look out to be the fool. The entire Bible, you see it play out like this. But nowhere more boldly does it come out than in the book we're going to study over the next 2 weeks of Esther. On Wednesday, starting at sundown, you may not have known this, but the Jewish world celebrated the festival of Purim. And I did mention it if you were here on Wednesday night, but regardless, Purim is a Jewish holiday that celebrates how God saved the Jewish people from annihilation again. By the way, if you go through their history, they've been tried to be annihilated many, many times. And I almost took us down a list of just what was in the Bible, if not what was in our history books, including in the last 60 years. It's been astronomical. And every time, Satan has not won, and God has come through. How to celebrate Purim? Well, first of all, they do a day of fasting before Purim, which would, for us would have been Tuesday. And it's a memorial fast of how Esther asked for the Jewish people to pray for her before she went to the king. Then they read the book of Esther. And this morning I'd like to have just a little bit of fun with it and do what they do. As we're going through this book of Esther, every time you hear the name Haman, I want you to boo. Because that's what the Jewish people do. Every time they read the name Haman, because he's the evil guy in the story, everybody says boo. But then every time you hear the name Mordecai, everybody cheers. Yay! So when we're going through, we don't have to take a long time. Just hit it out real quick, all right? They also give to the needy because in their need, when their entire nation or their entire people were in danger, they shared in the danger. So they also share in each other's needs and they give out to the poor. They also share food because they realize that friendship and family are important. And in that food, they have these little, it's funny, they have this little triangle cookie that they eat. And I've heard it both ways. I've heard it's either how Haman wore his hat or it's shaped like an ear. But either way, the Jewish people on Purim take those little cookies and they eat them. What a way to deal with your enemies. You eat their hats or their ears. I'm not sure which, but either one is funny. Then they also have a feast of celebration because they can. The fact that they are on this earth is a celebration in and of itself, and they have a great celebration. And then also, they have a masquerade ball, where the children will dress up with masks and look different. And the reason they do is because there's something unique about the book of Esther. God is hidden. God is hidden. There's no overt mention of God's name anywhere in the book. I said overt. In fact, there's very little or nothing to do with religious things in this book at face value. Not to mention the worshiping of God, faith in Him. There's no mention of heaven or hell or even prophecy about the Messiah. It's a very unique book. It's nothing like anything else. In fact, it was so unique that Martin Luther, the reformer, didn't even want it in the canon, didn't want it in your list of books of the Bible because he didn't believe it belonged there. Now, since then, we have found that he was in error, but he didn't like it. Esther's name in Persia means star. Star. She was named in Persia after the goddess Ishtar, and also the god of Venus. But in Hebrew, the root of her name is Hestar, and that means something hidden. Now, if every name's important, every place, every date are all important, why would God name this book something hidden? Unless there was something that he wanted you to find. And over the next 2 weeks, it is my goal to show what is not overt but hidden coming out in spades. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 16 through 18, God said this, "And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, you will rest with your fathers, and this people will rise and play the harlot with the gods of the foreigners of the land, where they go to be among them. And they will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be aroused against them in that day, and will forsake them. I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. And many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, Have not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us? And I will surely," he says this twice, "hide my face in that day, because all of the evil which they have done, in that they have turned to other gods." And he even goes as far, and I didn't have time for it, to give them a song. And Moses taught them a song before he died, so that they, when they saw God's face hid from them, they could sing it later on as a testimony against them. God promised that when they disobeyed, when they were gone, that he would hide his face from them, because they, instead of just being disciplined, were now following the other gods. And that's exactly what's taken place. So where are we in history? Because this is actually a very historical book and been proven many times over to be historically accurate. Herodotus, the father of history, wrote many volumes and talked about these stories that we read in our Bible. This was during the Babylonian captivity. By the time of Esther, Cyrus has already encouraged the Jews to return to their homeland. And you'll find it in Ezra, chapter 6 and chapter 7 is about the time frame. The problem was there was huge numbers that did not go back. Cyrus went as far, like we mentioned last week, to pay them to go back to their homeland. And as few, less than 50,000 people actually returned to their homeland. They decided that living amongst the world and sinners and Gentiles was just fine for them, because it served the pocketbook. Lord help them. Lord help us. Yeah. In Jeremiah chapter 29, chapter 50, and chapter 51, Jeremiah warns them and encourages the children of Israel that you're going to be gone in Babylon for 70 years. When that 70 years is up and you return, you need to return. You don't stay in Babylon anymore. But there was a whole host that did. The book of Esther takes place over about 10 years. 483 BC is Esther chapter 1 verse 3, and that's the third year of Xerxes' reign. And then it goes to somewhere around 473 BC, Xerxes' 12th year of reign, and that's in Esther chapter 3 verse 7. This takes place, if you want to remember it, around 30 years before Nehemiah. And in fact, the book of Nehemiah would not exist if Esther would not have had the bravery that she had. It wouldn't even be in the Bible. And what's also interesting is there's a prophecy that's focused around that in the book of Daniel that happened just before this. Remember, Daniel was there when Cyrus was there, and God gave him a prophecy of 70 weeks. All of that could only take place when Esther was obedient. Okay, let's see. Esther chapter 1. Now I'm only going to take out a few verses, because obviously we can't read 5 chapters in our allotted time. So I've just taken out important verses. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. Think about that. The span of his nation was Ethiopia on the east and India on the west. That's a large backyard. And he covered all 127 provinces. Now we see it here as King Ahasuerus. In the Greek that we know well and is well documented in history, his name is Xerxes. His father was Darius the First. Daniel served under Darius the First. Xerxes' grandfather was Cyrus, the one that sent the children of Israel home. Xerxes' son, his name was Artaxerxes Longimanus. And he's the one that told Nehemiah to go home. That was the one that started the prophecy of Daniel's 70-week prophecy that you have in Daniel. But King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which is in Shushan, the citadel. Today they call it Susa in Iran, and archaeology has found this all over. They found this very palace. They found the gates that are in chapter 4, verse 2, the inner court, chapter 5, verse 1, the outer court, chapter 6, verse 4, and the garden in chapter 7, verse 7. Like I said, this book is well proven. Verse 3, that in the 3rd year of Ahasuerus' reign, he made a feast for all of his officials and servants, the powers of Persia, Media, the nobles, and the princes of the province being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellence, majesty for many days, 180 days in all. He set up a party for all the rulers in his nation for 6 months straight. Now you talk about a party. There ain't no telling what happened in that party. But it was a long party. Herodotus tells us that the reason he had this party was because he was trying to convince his governors and nobles to go to war with Greece. Because Ahasuerus wanted to revenge his father losing at the Battle of Marathon. Do you remember the Battle of Marathon? They're losing, and they win the battle. And so they send this guy off, and this guy runs all the way back, and he gets there and says, "Be at peace, we've won." And you find the phrase marathon, and also the gas station marathon, because of this occasion. Xerxes wants to get revenge for his father, and so he wants to go back and war with Greece. And it takes 6 months of convincing and parties to get him to do so. So verses 9 through 19, in this party, Queen Vashti, her name means beautiful. And rabbis believe that she was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She didn't want to flaunt herself, but the king wanted her to do a dance. To do a dance all in front of all these nobles. And she said she wouldn't do it. Well, couldn't have that. A wife disobeying the husband, especially the king. So they deposed her. And that happens from verses 9 through 19. Now, in between chapter 1 and chapter 2, there's about a 4-year span where Xerxes, after convincing his nobles to go to war, heads up to Greece with what Herodotus said was 2.6 million soldiers. And they go to take places like Athens. The problem was, when he got there, he faced battles like Thermopylae and Salamis and Plataea, and was completely routed. If you remember the story of Thermopylae, the Persian army comes, and they come to a little pass, and there's 300 men that have followed a man named Leonidas that says, "You will not pass." And those 300 men held that pass for quite a while until they were betrayed. And they still lost the battle, but in that time, it was more political than anything, and all of Athens and Greece itself decided to go to war against Persia. But if you've seen the movie 300 or the older movie about the Battle of Thermopylae, that's what it's talking about. And Xerxes lost badly. Yeah. Salamis, The Battle of Salamis was a naval battle. He is sitting on his throne watching the battle because he has 400 ships. They have 380, and he's convinced he's going to win. By trickery, his ships are led off into a different direction where they are immovable, and they end up losing 200, literally half of his entire fleet in one afternoon, where the Greeks only lost 40. Needless to say, it didn't take him long, and once the Battle of Plataea happened, Xerxes ran home with his army starving, leaving 300,000 men behind to protect his rear as he headed home with his tail between his legs. So needless to say, he gets home, and he's looking for loving. And since he's already got rid of Vashti, they got to do something else. So his nobles say, listen, we got a plan. Let's have a beauty contest. All of the fair maidens of the land will come up. They will join your harem, and one of them you'll pick the queen. Would it surprise you that the king liked this idea? He did. Esther chapter 2, verse 2, they said, let the beautiful women, virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint officials of all the province of his kingdom there in the capital. Let the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this thing pleased the king, and he did so. Verse 5, in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. Hey, you got it, all right. Who is the son of Jair and the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Now, we know that Esther joins in this beauty contest, and she's more fair than anybody else. But all of a sudden, we are interdicted with this little man, and it, for some reason, gives us his history, who he is. He's a Kish. He's from Kish, a Benjamite. Now, if you look in your Bibles, who else was a son of Kish? Saul, King Saul, the first king. Now, here's what's interesting. It also says that he's the son of Shimei. Does anybody else know who Shimei was? He was also of the same family. But when David is on the run from Absalom, Shimei is following along beside him, cursing them and throwing stones at David's entourage who are running for their lives. When David returns, Shimei is the first one to meet him. Oh, Lord, forgive me. Now that you're in control, I'm sorry. Both times, Abishai, one of David's mighty men, said, let me just go cut this dog's head off and get over with it. But David doesn't. Uh-oh. Go to the next slide, Daniel. David doesn't. Look at David's response. He says, but the king said, what have I to do with you sons of Zeruiah, which that was Abishai? So let him curse. Because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing in this day. David showed mercy when he didn't need to. He was the king. He showed mercy. And because of this, we have Mordecai. Yeah. But do you remember the story of Saul? Saul's disobedience brings us to another person. Chapter 2, verse 7. Mordecai raised Esther. She was a cousin. Her family died, so he raised her. In chapter 2, verses 8 through 15, her and the other maidens, they go into the king's harem, and he chooses her. Verse 16, so Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is in the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all of the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all of the other virgins. So he was set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now, can you believe this? An insignificant Jewish girl in a foreign land, because of a beauty contest, becomes queen of everyone in the known world in a matter of a year. By the way, it took them a year for their beauty treatments. So I guess we can't complain, guys, when we're a little late and they're still in the mirror, right? Chapter 2, verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat with the king's gates, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Tersha, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay their hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when the inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on the gallows. And it is written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So we have this wonderful story about Esther, and she gets in, and wow, she's the queen. Well, in her position, she has not told the king of her nationality, her bloodline, because that would have been detrimental. They were not well liked. She doesn't mention it, but she gives her cousin, who's taken care of her entire life, an important job to sit at the king's gate. While he's there, he's doing nothing more than being obedient, but he overhears a plot to kill an evil king. Now, any of the rest of us would say, well, buddy, you could go in this way and might nobody find you. But Mordecai didn't. Thank you. What he did was he went and told Esther. Esther told the king, and he was saved. And they wrote it down in a book. Way to go. You did a good job. That was it. By the way, later on, Xerxes would die by a plot from two different men in his court because of an assassination. Apparently, he didn't get it the second time around. But also, it says it hanged on the gallows. This is actually not quite correct. It was impaled on a pole. And we'll deal with this in a little while next week. But this was the first version of crucifixion. The Persians were the ones that invented it. The Romans were the ones that perfected it so that our Messiah might suffer and endure through it. But this was being impaled. It wasn't being hung. Chapter 3, verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him to set in the seat above the princes who were with him. He literally became the viceroy or vizier. But here again, it gives us another name, an Agagite. If you go to 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 20, God gave Saul directive through Samuel that he should go and destroy every person of Agag's family. Man, woman, and child. Beasts and all. Not one was to survive. But Saul decided to keep a little bit for himself. God had made perpetual war against the Amalekites because while the children of Israel were wandering around in the wilderness, they came and instead of attacking the front guard, no, they attacked the rear with the women and children. And it was just evil. And God said there would be a perpetual war. And there's also reason for Genesis chapter 6, but we don't have time to go down that road. Saul was supposed to wipe them all out, but he didn't. In fact, he saved the best of the animals. He even saved Agag. Chapter 15, verse 20. And Saul said to Samuel, "But I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and gone out on a mission which the Lord sent me. And he brought back King Agag of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people who took of the plunder and the sheep and the oxen, the best of the things which they should have utterly destroyed, they brought them to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." Yeah, that's what the Lord wanted. Then Samuel said, Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from becoming king. Saul didn't obey, and it was such an affront to God that God removed him and put David in his place. What happened, though, because of Saul's disobedience. You fast forward several hundred years, and now you find this man named Haman because Saul disobeyed. You know, our disobedience always has repercussions. And for Saul, it almost wiped out an entire nation. Chapter 3, verses 2 through 7. Haman wants to kill all the Jews because Mordecai did not want to bow to him. In chapter 3, verse 7, in the first month, which is in the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of the king of Ahasuerus, by the way, we're now in this 12th year, they cast Pur, that is the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month until it fell on the 12th month and the month of Adar. So what happened is, I almost said Mordecai. Haman went before the king because he wants to kill all these people. And what he said is, King, I'm going to give you a bunch of money. I'm going to bribe you if you let me kill them all off. And how he was planning on paying for it was once you kill everybody off, then you get to plunder all their goods, and he was going to get rich off it, and then he'd bless the kingdom. The kingdom needed it because the king had just had a disastrous war where he had lost tons of people. So he needed that money. He said, well, yeah, sure. I don't care who they are. So what they did, the Persians were very superstitious. What they would do is they would throw lots. They'd literally toss dice to plan their calendar throughout the year. One of these dice, you see in verse 7, is called Pur. That's where they get the name Purim. What's cool is, in archaeology, they actually found that die, I should say. They found it when they were digging. Yeah, exactly. Just to prove it over again. So detailed. But regardless, what they did is they cast lots. They threw dice to see when they were going to kill off all these Jews. And wouldn't you know it, poor Haman, he got a bad dice throw. He had to wait an entire year, the last month of the year, before he could finally kill off all the Jews. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 33 says, the lot is cast in the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. In other words, you can play dice all you want, but it's up to God how they fall. Right. Albert Einstein said God doesn't play dice. You know why he doesn't play dice? He'd win. Oh, you're going to throw dice to see when you can kill him? It's not going to be tomorrow, fellas. You get to wait until the end of the year. Chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. The genocide is made irreversible into irreversible law. Esther is their only hope of survival. In chapter 4, verse 13, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all of the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go and gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days and night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Chapter 5, verse 1. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes, and she stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat in his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. And so it was, when the king saw Esther standing in the court, that she... Well, I guess I left the rest of that passage out. I'll have to wait for next week. No. Isn't that terrible? You all know what happens anyway, right? If she was going to go before the king, if the king did not raise his scepter to her, she was dead. They would put a bag over her head and carry her out. And she said, if I show up to the king unannounced, and he doesn't raise that scepter, I haven't seen the king in a month, I could die. Mordecai said, yep, you probably will anyway. So let's apply this story in our last couple moments to our lives today. We haven't seen God at work anywhere in here. God's not been mentioned. And it's not because I picked and chose verses. You don't see him here. You overtly do not see God interacting for his people. But boy, you see a bunch of circumstances that, well, how could that have happened? Do you know that God wants to use the gifts he's given you to? Do you know that God formed you in your mother's womb just the way he wanted you, and that he formed Esther, to have a pretty face? Because he wanted to use that gift to save his people? You are here in your life for such a time as this. God throughout history has been used and will use and continue to use insignificant people to accomplish his bidding, to confound the wise. God wants you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 17, for Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, nor with wisdom of words, lest the cross of Christ should be made of no effect. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and bring nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness, but to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, that there's not many wise according to the flesh, not so many that are mighty, not many that are noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of this world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of this world and the things that are despised of God he has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. The temptation to tell us is that we are insignificant, that we don't have it, that God couldn't use us. And you know what? We are insignificant. That's probably true. But that doesn't mean that God can't use us. In fact, it probably means that he will. Go down through the Bible. The next slide, Daniel. Look at all these names. And this is just that came off the top of my head. Abraham was as good as dead, Hebrews tells us. Sarah nearly. Jacob was a heel grasper. Ruth was a Moabitess. They weren't even supposed to exist. Moses, he said, who am I to go to Pharaoh? He even used Balaam's donkey. For crying out loud, if he can use Balaam's donkey, surprise, surprise, he can make you talk too. He used Rahab, who was a Gentile harlot. He used Gideon, the mighty man of valor, when he was hiding. Who's Jael? She wasn't anybody. She was a nobody. But you know what? God used her to send a stake through the temples of Sisera. She was a nobody, but she was willing to be used. David, he was the bottom of the family barrel. Elijah was a man with a nature just like ours. Amos, he was a farmer. Jonah, he was a stubborn prophet that didn't want to obey God. In our passage today, God used a simple girl with a pretty face. He used a simple Jew who could have gone home and should have gone home but didn't, just doing his job. He will even use the evil plot of Haman for the salvation of his people. God wants to use the insignificant you in his plan. He placed you right where you are with the resources that you have because he wants you to use what he's given you to accomplish the tasks before you. If you procrastinate, refuse, or are outright evil, God will still use you, but you won't like how it turns out. Mordecai bloomed where he was planted, and he would be raised to the vizier. Haman will be evil and plot against God, only to take the place where he intended for Mordecai. Boy, you all sound so happy. I'm closing, all right? We want God to use us like a bull in a china shop. Powerful, forceful. We want him to use us like he did Samson. Go to the next slide, Daniel. But honestly, those are the exceptions to the rules. That's not normally how God works. We want God to explode inside of us. But honestly, the way he works most of the time is through a still small voice. We want to see him make great moves in destroying the enemy's pieces on the chessboard. But often, he works through quiet manipulation of the pieces to bring about his end. We want God to do big things. But often, the miraculous is shown through the small. The cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. Go to the next slide, Daniel. But for those of us that are being saved, it's power. The way of the cross is meekness. It's not weakness. That's not the same word. Weakness is the lack of power. Meekness is power under control. And Christ went to the cross in meekness. And he shouted with a loud voice in strength and gave up the ghost. The cross is foolishness to this world. But God is asking us if we will be like Simon of Cyrene and go and pick up his cross and follow Jesus. Please get this. This is a revelation that there's a lot of people that can't get. We want God to come on us mightily, empower us, to make us wiser, to do miracles through us. But all the while, he says, I want to use what I've already given you because I want to have the glory. If he makes us huge and powerful and big, guess what? We're going to take the glory for ourselves. Samson did. But if he works through what he's already given us, then he gets the glory for it. Because Lord knows we're not anything but insignificant. God says, you don't have because I have. And I will give you exactly what you need, that I would get the glory from it. So what does he put right before you? How can you be faithful today, right now? I'm warning you, I've read the rest of this book. And everybody that doesn't bloom where they're planted, it doesn't end well. Bloom where you're planted. God is calling you right now, right where your life is at, with what he has given you for such a time as this. Will you be used by him? Brother Don, will you come? Will you answer him as Isaiah did and said, Lord, here am I, send me. You don't have to be anything special. He doesn't want anything special, or he'd have made you that way. He wants you. Will you be used by him? Would you stand with us? Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I pray this video was a blessing to you. If it was, please hit the like button. This helps other people find our content as well. You can also subscribe to the channel by clicking on my beautiful face. This will give you announcements when we put out new videos. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists of our verse-by-verse Bible studies, and then you'll also see the newest video that we've put out. We try to put out 2 or 3 a week. I pray that God richly blesses you. Thank you for watching.